Right, welcome to Gender in the Hunger Games. Buckle up, I have a lot to say. I'll probably do multiple videos. There's way too much to address in just one video or even like 10, but I will try my best. My thesis is the Hunger Games story is greatly impacted by gender patriarchy, expectation, and the performance of gender roles. The first thing I want to address is that yes, the Hunger Games can be compared to a lot of things. It's pulling from like a lot of different histories across the world. That is all fine, but it is important to acknowledge how the Hunger Games is an American-specific story. It is a reflection of the United States and the ideas the United States was founded on, which are capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. These ideas are all embedded in this story in the world building. While not blatantly addressed or pointed out to you, they are there and they are crucial parts. You could make a video essay on any of these. Let's start with Everlark. Everlark's purpose as a duo in this series is challenging the ideas of tradition in Panem, right? They're the ones who pull out the berries. They're pushing back against President Snow, the Capitol, the game makers, the games themselves. They begin the spark to start the revolution, right? They're working overtime in this arena because while they're in this cave, they are subverting the traditional roles of what we see in a relationship. So it was long believed that we lived in this very traditional gendered society, hunter-gatherer, where men hunted, provided, protected, and women, were nurturing. They maintained the family, they gathered, they maintained the house. This has since been debunked. There was like a study in 2021. You can look it up on your own. This is not reality. It's a very Western European way of thinking. Again, not reality. This is pushing back on this. Remember, this was published in 2008. When they're in the cave, they're playing house. They're playing house. It's fascinating. It is so interesting. She's going out, she's hunting, she's providing, she's protecting. He is in the cave, the house. He is maintaining the fire, maintaining the house. He is, gathering berries, stuff to eat. Interesting. They're constantly pushing back. Peeta himself is pushing back against traditional expectations for men. He's not your typical YA love interest. That being said, he is number one book boyfriend. Number one book boyfriend. Ask literally any woman, okay? He is given these traits that are seen as emasculating or feminine, and it doesn't make him less of a man. He's depicted as being more emotionally in tune and sensitive. One of the first scenes we see of him is him crying. And this is really, really interesting. Obviously, there's more optics there with the optics of the game, the cameras at play, and Katniss points this out. But him crying is huge, okay? He has interests that are also considered feminine, painting and baking. His reaction to things isn't physical action, and this one will come back. And then the last thing is he's deemed weak or emasculated by people in the world and the audience, okay? People who watch the movies, people who read the books, constantly say this guy is weak. And it's interesting because he's still number one book boyfriend. So I think people need to do a little soul searching and address that because people love this man and he's not less of a man for any of these traits. Now we got to talk about Katniss and Gale. Now I'm kind of scared to get into this because this is going to be a long part and you have to be engaging in it in a nuanced way, but a lot of people don't like to do that with Gale, but let's try. This is not another reason to just dump on Gale. There are valid reasons to dislike this character. I don't like this character, but I'm not going to just say, oh, he's a raging misogynist or any of these things just because I don't like him. It's not necessarily true, okay? I'm going to be talking about the way these two are socialized for their gender, right? He's socialized as a boy, she's socialized as a girl, impacting their characters and the way that they act. Why? Because from the very beginning, these two are talked about as if they are the same, okay? From the very beginning to the end, Katniss says, we are the same, we are fire, we are anger. This is fascinating. About the entire series, they are so different. Okay, these two are from the poorest class in the poorest district. They are starving, they are struggling to get by. They lose their dad in the same tragic event that leaves them traumatized and very angry at the world. Valid, okay? They then are forced to become parentified children in their family and become the provider and protector that is then lost with the father. Okay, same background. And yet, when we meet them in the woods, Katniss says, okay, we look the same, we are the same, and all we can see is difference. Specifically, the instance I always think of is when he's complaining about the games, about the world, and already their understanding of the world is so different, and she just lets him rant because that's what he does all the time. He's angry, he rants, and she never does because she thinks it's pointless and whatever. The difference here is gender. The small caveat here is that Katniss is not only taking on the paternal figure, but also the maternal, because her mom's absent. So she's not just doing the work that is provider, protector, making sure her family doesn't starve, which is traumatizing on its own, valid, Gale, okay? She's also doing the maternal work. That is emotional labor. That is making sure everything is okay in that family. She also understands if she leaves this family, if she's not around, this family will not survive. Even though they have Gale to rely on, she does not think they will survive, okay? This is huge. This is very different from Gale. Gale has his mother. He has other siblings. He has other boys in the family. They just have each other. Additionally, Katniss is socialized as a girl and Gale is socialized as a boy. There are certain expectations that they will meet based on their gender. For example, women are expected in patriarchal societies to be seen, not heard. And Katniss does this a lot, right? What did I say about them? They're in the woods. He's complaining. He's loud. He's allowed to do that. She's not going to say that outright because that's not what she thinks. It's just how she's socialized. It's the way she's been raised. Additionally, emotions play a huge role between these two, right? They're both angry people, but that anger manifests in different ways because anger is an emotion that is seen as masculine. And men are allowed to have that anger, that emotion. Vice versa, women are allowed to cry and men are not. That's why huge deal that Peeta's crying, okay? There are emotions allotted to certain genders. And so Katniss will be seen as erratic and emotional if she shows these emotions. Sometimes she bottles it up. She tries not to show it. She's hyper aware of this. And there's lots of reason for this, but I think gender plays a huge one. And the difference between Gale's behavior being a little bit more reckless is because he doesn't have the consequences of just being the only family member to depend on. I think also men are allowed to be a little bit more reckless. He's allowed to depict his anger and he's allowed to be loud and say these things, even though Katniss thinks that they are dangerous and you shouldn't say them. Think also, again, women are allowed to be a little bit more emotional than men. It still hurts both of them in the long run, okay? But Gale never learns a good way to process this anger, which leads me to Gale's tragic character. He is the perfect boy to groom into a soldier because he is angry, because his first instinct when action happens is physical action. He will become the perfect soldier and his story becomes tragic. It is tragic because a lot of his anger and his frustration and emotions are valid. He just goes to the wrong place. Now let's move on to my final part of part 1. 2 boys, 2 depictions of masculinity. If you've been living under a rock, the love triangle is not actually just a love triangle. It is a depiction of a lot of debates in Katniss's heads and how to process certain things. The biggest one is the just cause for war theory. That is a whole nother can of worms. I'm here to talk about these 2 boys and masculinity and the way it manifests in their emotions, right? We talked about how Peeta is emotionally in tune. He is okay with showing these emotions and finding good, healthy ways to process things. Gale does not, and it ends up being tragic for him. And in the end, in the very last paragraph of Mockingjay, she talks about how we're the same. I'm angry, I'm fire, we're both fire, but I can't do that because that's not the best way to move forward. What I need is something more helpful. Peeta. She's almost acknowledging how this system is not benefiting anyone by sticking to what you are expected, by being socialized in this way. It is actually harming everyone. It is not a system for everyone. And by pushing against it, by being outside the lines, by being yourself, it is better. That was long, I'm out of breath, and if you want to join me next time, I'll be talking about gender performance as a key aspect to the games. The first thing we need to address is gender performance, right? Masculine and feminine roles are not biologically fixed, but socially constructed, and this is what informs our characters. We talked about it with Peeta, Gale, and Katniss, right? Judith Butler popularized this idea. Performing gender is a necessary condition being in society. If you do not perform a gender role, meet these expectations, you risk being marginalized, ostracized, even killed. Especially true within Panem, within the games. Something you will see here is the system works for no one. It is broken. Everyone loses. Okay? Remember that. Keep that in the back of your mind. Let's talk about the games. When people talk about the Hunger Games, they think of survival. Can I run? Can I fight? Can I do all of these things? Great, fine. That's not what the games are about. They're about performance, and it's thanks to Lucy Gray. The first 9 games were about just fighting, but it didn't work. And the 10th game served as a reinventing of the game to maintain the capital's control over the districts. Very, very crucial. Snow studies what Lucy Gray does. And honestly, a lot of what she does ends up with what we're familiar with 64 years later. She is a performer. She sings. She writes songs about her life. She sells her story, all of these things. But even the way she operates in the games themselves is that of a performer, right? People say Lucy Gray is a performer trapped in a fight. Katniss is a fighter trapped in a performance. What does Gale tell Katniss? Right before she goes, you got to put on a good show. That is all they want. This is not about a fight. This is about a performance. How do tributes put on a good show? I'm glad you asked. There's 3 things I'm really thinking about. You have to sell your story, your angle yourself. This is like reality competition shows. You have to get the audience rooting for you. You have to have the jury voting for you. And you have to have this story, right? Katniss does. She, is good at survival and hunting and all of these things, but it is these things that move her forward, that make her win. She has the angle of, I'm saving my sister. I need to get back to my sister. We are family, all these things. She's desirable. Cinna makes her desirable and dresses. Peeta presents her as desirable when he confesses his love for her. Then we have the love story aspect. People want to see that play out. This is what pushes her forward. And without this, she can't move forward. Then you have to be entertaining. In this moment, Clove can really easily take out Katniss, but it is about the entertainment, and she knows that, and she's going to put on a show to get her further in the game. Unfortunately for her, it ends up not working out. But this is a key aspect. You have to put on a show. Katniss even acknowledges this. When she thinks there's lulls in the game, she's like, I need to put on a show. I need to continue the story so the game makers don't get involved. Then the last and most important thing is you have to conform to what the Capitol approves of, right? You have to fit their mold. And this includes gender. Capitol, the game makers, these people are the ones in control, and they're going to decide who gets to move forward or not. Sponsors, all these things. Someone who's super rebellious, who's breaking the mold, is not going to move forward. You have to play by their rules. When Glimmer gets on stage before the games, she is putting on a persona, putting on a performance of a hyper-feminine, hyper-sexualized girl, which is acceptable by the Capitol standards, right? She's wearing this sheer girly dress. She's flirting. She's doing all of these things. This is fine. This is what they have to do. Look at them on stage, right? Their lives depend on their approval and support. Look at the way that the girls are dressed. They're more revealing. It's more girly. It's fitting into that mold. Look at the way they're sitting. It is very different from the boys. This is different. This is all a performance, a presentation, and they have to fit the Capitol mold. Because if they don't, they literally risk their lives. The other part to this is they're not just putting on a performance, but they have to meet the beauty standards. The beauty standards obviously intersect with the gender performance because there's certain ideas of beauty that fit gender. It's very arbitrary. We know this. What's the first thing that happens to the tributes when they get to the Capitol? They are brought into their stylist to meet the beauty standards, right? Katniss talks about how they remove all her body hair because this is a standard for women. She notices that Peeta gets to keep his body hair in the games. This is what happens to the girls. There are other things as well. Then after the games, Katniss, needs to continue to put on this performance of her gender to meet this expectation. One of those is that she is very, very thin. She is flat-chested, and they want to give her a boob job. Luckily, Cinna and Haymitch intervene, and she wears padding from there on, okay? But this is an expectation of performance of gender, right? You're going to fit a certain mold. Let me tell you, it is not easy to be a woman in Panem, right? The odds are not in your favor. What was that first thing I said? Okay, no one wins in this system, even if you play by the rules. Glimmer still doesn't make it. Cashmere still doesn't make it. Tigris is ostracized, even though she tried to keep up with the Capitol beauty standards, all these things. But these girls are really where I'm focusing on because they're playing the game. And they're playing a game in a very particular way because there's 2 ways people see women, okay? Unfortunately, you can be the innocent schoolgirl that's not a threat. You're kind of like Glimmer playing. It's interesting because the 3 of them kind of do this, right? They're innocent. They need saving, all these things. Joanna, she plays frail until the end of the games. Katniss, she's just this schoolgirl in love. She's trying to make it back to her sister. All of these things. Fantastic. Okay, the Capitol's fine with that. But then suddenly they start to push back against the mold, and that is a threat. And that's where they enter this second personality, which is a lot of people see women who do not fit this mold as, manipulative and, calculating and a threat. And that's why these 3 end up in the 75th games, the 3rd quarter quell, right? These women are a threat because they go into this. They become a threat. When Snow realizes that Lucy Gray doesn't need saving, but is actually a player and someone who's very, very bright, but to him is a threat, he's going to do something about it. So Katniss spends the majority of the games, pushing back against the Capitol, fighting the Capitol, pulling out the berries. She's also playing a more traditionally masculine role within this couple, right? She's the protector, provider, all these things. And then they get out of the games and she's in trouble. What does she do? She has to kind of backpedal by acting very hyper feminine, acting like this, right? She's the schoolgirl in love. She's so innocent. She couldn't do anything else. She has to perform this very hyper feminine version of herself in order to be deemed okay by the Capitol. This is the most acceptable version of her in the Capitol's eyes. And the same thing happens for the men, right? If they don't fit the system, they are a threat. If they don't play into the roles that they are expected, they are a threat, right? Sejanus, Snow views as a threat for many reasons, but one of those is, he's very, very sensitive. He's attuned to his emotions. He's kind of similar to Peeta. A lot of people will draw comparisons between these two. And to Snow, that is a threat. Why does he act like that? And that's because Snow probably doesn't understand emotions properly, but that's another story. He views these people as threats because they don't fit that traditional masculinity. And even if you play by the system, right? Glimmer played by the system. It didn't work out for her. Tigris tried to play into the Capitol system. Didn't work out. Cato plays into this very toxic version of masculinity. And what's the story of his character? The lesson of his character? Nobody wins in a hierarchical system. It is corrupt. Even those who play by the rules lose. He loses. Everything he does is by the Capitol playbook. And yet he still loses because it's a system that is broken. But he does make it pretty far in the games, and I think a lot of that can be owed to the way that he plays the games. He knows exactly how the, game makers, how the Capitol wants to see it. He knows exactly what to put on and what not, what parts of him to hide. But again, still loses. The system's corrupt. We can see how it hurts other people, right? Gale, because he's socialized as a boy and boys are not allowed to fully feel their emotions or process them, he never learns how to process his emotions, which means he's very angry, which means he's perfect to be Grim to be a soldier. We talked about that yesterday, okay? These two, they have to constantly put on this performance, and anytime they break out of the mold, they become a threat. But what have we learned? Those who do not perform and conform are viewed as a threat, and they lose. And to win the games, to survive the games, because there's no real winners, you have to perform and conform. Welcome back to Gender in the Hunger Games, where I overanalyze this series through the lens of patriarchy and gender. This is part 3. We're going to be talking about Snow today. Snow thinks everyone is beneath him. I will agree to that. He thinks everyone is beneath him. He is God's gift to Earth. Thank God he's running this country, all of these things. His misogyny, he is a raging misogynist, and it plays a crucial role in both the way he runs this country and his downfall. First thing we're going to look at is the family. Freud would have a field day, okay? A lot of people are asking me, what are the expectations of life in the Capitol, gender roles in the Capitol? Well, Snow's family is a very traditional, very, very traditional nuclear family, right? If this is pulling from America, America loves the nuclear family. Snow is the nuclear family. It's going to give you some ideas of what life in the Capitol is like. So we have this very traditional masculine patriarch of the family. He's the leader, he's the face, he's kind of the shadow over the family, right? He's described as stoic, emotionally distant. Snow is scared of him growing up. He's not close with him, all of these things. He is, however, very close with his mother, who's very feminine, soft, all these things, dainty. Okay, that's how he describes her. Then there's Snow. He is the eldest boy in the family. He's going to carry on the family name. And then there's a baby girl, right? Mom is pregnant with a baby girl during the Dark Days Revolution. It's important that we mention that this is specifically a baby girl, because why is that important? The mom's pregnant with a girl during wartime. There are not enough resources. She can't get help. So the mom passes, and so does the baby girl. Much later, the father dies in combat. And so Snow is going to, for the rest of his life, blame the districts on this, right? He would have parents if the districts didn't have this revolution. And at first, he's very, very attached to his mother. He has this compact. He smells it all the time. He's a weirdo, all these things. He's very attached to her. But the second he starts to view her in a light that she is less than, she is weak, all of these things. In addition, it is the baby's fault also that the mom's not there. You know, you can start to see where his distaste for women begins. And then he starts to idolize his father. Then we got to talk about who he actually grows up with, Tigris, right? So they're kind of similar in some ways. Okay, be careful here. I'm not saying Snow and Gale are the same, but Gale and Katniss, right? They both have this immense expectation on them because they are parentified, they are deeply traumatized, they have these huge expectations. Snow is the eldest boy, and so when he grows up, he has the expectation to be the face of the family, to carry on the family name, to be the provider. And so when we enter Ballad, he is 18, this expectation is weighing on him, and it is immediate, and I don't want to diminish that, right? Okay, that's serious. But Tigris, like Katniss, is the eldest daughter. And so she has to sacrifice everything about her life, put it to the side to make sure that this boy gets ahead, right? That everyone else survives. She even at one point has to sell her body to make ends meet. And horribly enough, Snow thinks of her as less than because of this. So obviously their relationship begins to deteriorate over time. We don't fully get to see this, but we can piece it together. But she mothers him and he grows to resent her because why? He kind of hates women, okay? He hates that. He hates it, okay? We got to talk about Sejanus. Sejanus's family as a whole stands for everything that Snow hates and has lost. So he just hates this family. Obviously, they're from the district. There's multiple optics at play here, but also gender plays a huge part. The men he views as pathetic and weak, specifically Sejanus does not fit the role of like a traditional man. He's emotional, all these things. And so he views him as a threat to the system. He is a weakness. He hates him, okay? The mother, he also points out specifically in this family as being pathetic and weak and less than, right? And this is kind of awful because then when Sejanus passes, Snow inserts himself as, the adoptive son to these parents. And he hates them. What an awful guy. Okay, so we've looked at his background. What do we learn from this? Snow hates women, okay? Yes, he hates women. He hates the feminine, present with more feminine traits. He just hates it all. Everyone is beneath him, but in particular, this is playing a huge role. So we meet Lucy Gray. Again, multiple optics at play. She is from the districts. There's a power dynamic here. He is her mentor. She is a tribute, all these things. But Snow is very possessive of Lucy Gray. He's kind of in love with her, but not like in love. Like he's just fascinated with her and views her as an object of his, right? That's an important distinction. They're not actually in love. And he views her as this innocent thing needing protecting, and it's his girl, right? He says it all the time. That's my girl. Possessive. She's not her own person. But once he starts to realize she's her own person, and she plays the game, and not only that, he starts to specifically view her in a more negative light when he learns that she might have sold her body to make ends meet. Oh, it's over. She's a threat. She's playing the game. She's not fitting that specific mold that he wants her to. And so he's got to take her out, which then leads us to the way that he operates moving forward, right? Lucy Gray is a huge part of the way he is today, and he will never let that go, right? Because he is a loser. So when we get to Katniss, people have obviously pointed out before that there are parallels between Lucy Gray and Katniss, and for Snow especially, he's going to see that because he is obsessed with Lucy Gray. He's obsessed. He's probably viewing Katniss as the songbird that is returning to haunt him. But we really got to talk about Katniss, right? I talked about Katniss before. She's breaking the mold. She's not fitting into that specific, expectation of women. She's a protector. She's a provider. She's going to fight for herself. So because of that, she's a threat. In addition, Snow's going to see her as an extra threat because he's going to see parallels between her and Lucy Gray. He's going to focus so much on her. He's going to make her the face of the revolution. It's kind of his fault. Like, it really is. Like, he accelerates the timeline here. The revolution was eventually going to happen with or without Katniss in play. But because he focuses so much on her, he puts her into, the quarter quell. He gives her the platform. People start to empathize even more. They feel like the system is very, very corrupt and unjust. All of these things. He causes the revolution. He causes his own downfall. And not just with her, this duo, right? Because there's an importance in this duo, right? He's going to dismiss Peeta because he's going to see him as weaker, right? All these things, he's not going to care about him. And the thing is, these two, they play off each other in a very interesting way. And if you don't consider both of them, you will lose. Because 90% of the time, these two are acting rebellious or acting, oh, let me get up to something today. It's in inspiration of the other, right? They're doing it for one another. Everlark forever. Because Snow dismisses Peeta because he views him as weak, because he has feminine characteristics, feminine traits, and because he's focusing so hard on Katniss breaking the mold and his hatred of women and women like this, he causes his own downfall. Coriolanus, you look just like your father. You're this traditional patriarch. You hate women. You're dead.